Welcome to the Big Me Kickoff. It is rivalry week. It is the game. It is Ohio State. It is Michigan. It is all of the pleasantries and unpleasantries that come with that game. I want to wish everybody a pleasant Thanksgiving, however, here on the Big Me Kickoff, as I'm joined by longtime friend Michael Spath, who I've worked with at various stops along the way and is a huge knower of all things Michigan, as I'm trying to figure out the best words there. Michael, how are you doing, man?
I'm doing great. I was waiting for to see what you were going to come up with, a huge jackass or a huge, what were you going to fill in there? Yeah, certainly it's been a 20-year career in some various roles covering the University of Michigan in sports media as a writer with the Wolverine, and then 5 years as sports talk show host. Now it's essentially I don't even call it freelance because nobody pays me for it anymore. But I do multiple radio shows every week, one in Ann Arbor and then one with the biggest radio station in Detroit called WJR, and just keep my pulse on it. I also teach at the University of Michigan, so a couple different places and 42 years of following, paying attention to this team. So happy to be here and happy to talk about the game, which suddenly now has taken on a greater. The rivalry seems to be back, even though Michigan only won one of these games. It does seem like the rivalry is back the way that it's supposed to be.
And we're sitting here with two 11-0 teams. A ticket to Indianapolis is on the line. It would appear, just based with the East dominance over the West in the Big Ten championship game, that a sure berth in the college football playoff is on the line. I mean, chance that the runner-up could maybe get in as well. But what's the juice like up there in Ann Arbor around this? I mean, just because you're right, Ohio State had its run, just like Michigan has had its run. I mean, obviously, before we were both around, the start of the rivalry, where Ohio State, it took them 15 years really to get over on Michigan, but even much more recently, and back in my undergraduate days during the John Cooper era, where Ohio State went 2-10-1 against Michigan. And then, of course, Ohio State has had its run under Tressel, Urban Meyer, and Ryan Day. I mean, but what's the juice like up there?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of excitement for the game, largely because and we can talk about Blake Corum and the health of Michigan here in a minute, but there's this sense that if Michigan can win back-to-back games in the rivalry, not only does it put Ohio State on its heels for really the first time, because last year, yeah, it was a great win, and but the Buckeyes, oh, okay, it's an anomaly, it's a 1-year exception type of thing. But this would put Ohio State on its heels. I'm not a big believer in, like, hey, I want to see a coach get fired, but like Michigan fans are salivating at the idea that Ryan Day could be on the hot seat if the Wolverines win again. And from a Michigan perspective, the bigger thing is that it legitimizes Jim Harbaugh even further. The first 6 years of the Harbaugh era were not what people expected, and then he goes out there and wins that game a year ago, wins the Big Ten championship, goes to the college football playoff. And if he puts together another year, then people are really going to start to think about where Michigan is headed. Could it have a Clemson-like run? Could it have an Ohio State like run where it wins 5 of the next 8 Big Ten titles? It goes to 3 or 4 college football playoffs. Obviously, the college football playoffs are about to expand. So I think there's a strong likelihood that both Michigan, Ohio State, and maybe a Penn State are consistently among the teams that are making it. But yeah, there's a lot about what is Jim Harbaugh's legacy, and does Michigan, again, it'd be 2 games. It's not like Michigan is 8-0 in their last 8 against Ohio State. But if you win 2 games, suddenly it feels like this rivalry completely shifts to Michigan's side.
Yeah, it is kind of crazy. Ryan Day, 45-4 overall as a head coach, something like that. And there are fans in Columbus that are like, if he can't get past Michigan this year, I mean, you start looking, and you have to how fan bases can be. There's the rational fan base that generally stays off the computer, and then there's the crazy part, the rabid part that's on the computer and are generally the ones calling in to talk radio and everything
Hey man,
else.
it's how you have a job, Kevin. Those are
I
the
know.
best type. Those are
I love crazy. I love crazy. I mean, I'm crazy myself, but you brought up Blake Corum, and that's really kind of the $1 million question. And that's not really the only injury that Michigan's been dealing with, but that is probably the most visible one based on what the percentage of the workload that he carries in terms of his side of the ball. And I've heard bone bruise, I've heard meniscus. I mean, I was up in Ann Arbor on Monday, and Jim Harbaugh, like any other head coach, was very tight-lipped about it, wasn't going to say anything. But there's a lot of belief that one way or the other, as long as the leg is not in a full cast, that he's going to go out there and try and play, regardless if nobody's 100% at this time of the year, but whether he's 80%, 50%. But his importance, and just what are your feelings about what Corum may be?
I have every expectation that he will play in this game. I think he will try to gut it out. But gutting it out and being anywhere close to what you're capable of are two different things. I also been told that to run, to accelerate, to cut. I mean, he's going to be in considerable pain. And I think everybody kind of jokes about varsity blues, right? And shooting somebody up. And let's face it, in the 80s and in the 90s and the 70s, they used to shoot players up, and then ruin their careers, because it had a negative impact on their knees or their ankles or things like that. Now you can. I mean, I don't know if I like to use the term shoot them up, but you can prescribe some pain medication that does not, ruin their knees, ruin their future prospects. But it's still, I mean, you're not going to go out there with, a couple of doses of morphine in you, right? I mean, you're not. There's still going to be a pain threshold that you have to put up with. And one of the things that I resent a little bit is a fan telling Blake Corum what to do, right? Like, hey, man, like, yeah, if you want to prove how tough you are, if you're really all in for Michigan, you're going to play in this game. I compare it to this, Kevin. I broke my wrist when I was younger, and if someone would have said, hey, there's a levee that's breaking and there's a dam that's going to flood, and we need you to carry 50-pound bags for the next 3.5 hours with your broken wrist, like, what would you do? Right? I mean, how long would you be like, okay, I'm going to do it. I'm going to help the
I'd be
team.
I'd be swimming at that point.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, you'd be like, I'm gonna do it, and then literally, like, you're like 5 minutes into it, you're like, I'm not gonna do it, man. I'm not. This is not happening. So, I look at it from that perspective. So we'll see what he ends up doing on Saturday and how effective he is. How important is he to a team? Oh my God, man. I mean, Michigan built this offense for 11 weeks. And if you want to go back to last year, they built it around the running game. They had Hassan Haskins, who Ohio State fans know very, very well. And they had Blake Corum. This year they had Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards, and both of them are banged up. But they built this offense around the running game. They built this offense around Blake Corum. It's, to me, like, the best equivalent I can say is, if you remove CJ Stroud from the lineup on Saturday, what does Ohio State look like? I mean, I think they're probably not very. Can they get by? Do they have a decent backup? Can the backup step in? Do they have some other skill position players? Yeah, absolutely. But they don't have CJ Stroud. They've built an offense around the passing game down in Columbus. They've built the offense around Blake Corum in Ann Arbor. And so to take him out of the equation, I mean, we saw last week when he didn't play in the second half, Michigan ran three backups out there, and Illinois, I think, was, going back to the huddle and laughing, because they didn't fear those guys. Those weren't a threat to them at all. And Michigan was very ineffective running the football in the second half with his three backups. So yeah, I mean, they need him. At the very least, they need a healthy Donovan Edwards. The one positive is that those backups, I asked someone inside the program, how many total snaps did those three backups get last week with the first team offense? And he chuckled and said maybe five. And now this week, they're going to get all the first team reps. But if there's a reason that they're the third string or fourth string or fifth string running back. So it'll be interesting to see what happens on Saturday. I think all Michigan fans out there right now are doing either fingers crossed or they're down on their knees doing this and just praying. Hey, I know I'm supposed to pray for the people who are hungry and the people that are poor and the people that are going through depression on these things, but instead I'm just going to pray that Blake Corum is healthy.
Yeah, obviously CJ Stokes, Isaiah Gash, guys like that just did not do not look the same as Blake Corum, and there's a reason why Corum's 1, Edwards is 2, Stokes is 3, Gash is 4, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So if the running game is diminished, whether or not it's with 50% Corum or Edwards coming back from a hand injury or whatever, and you put the ball in JJ McCarthy's hands and say, all right, you're going to have to throw it 40 times to win this game. I mean, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, obviously, little short passes, little things to the tight ends. I mean, heck, he doesn't even have Eric
Yep.
All. I mean, Luke Schoonmaker's been hurt.
Yeah.
There's some injuries in that case. I mean, but do you trust JJ McCarthy to be able to go out there and win the game as a pass first quarterback?
No, and that's the rub. That's what Michigan fans are, nervous about is he hasn't done that but once this year against Indiana down in Bloomington, where he threw the ball for 325 yards. I think other than that, his highest game is maybe 220. He's averaging about 175 yards passing. This isn't 1975. This is 2022, and the guy's averaging 175 yards passing. I mean, what's happening here? Now I know there's probably some people in Columbus who are like, hell, well, if we'd like to have a dominant running game like Michigan does and be, tougher on the line of scrimmage, but at least they know that in CJ Stroud and Marvin Harrison, and this in the passing game for the Buckeyes that they've got, their key pieces. We hear all the time that it's working in practice, that they're doing it. They're completing the deep balls. They're making plays. JJ's pulling and running on the read option, but it has not materialized in the games. And Michigan has a saying. I don't know what the name of the streets are that are in Columbus for the practice field and the main stadium. But in Ann Arbor, the name of the street that the practice field is on is called State Street, and the name of the field, the street that the game is, or the stadium is on, is called Main Street. And so one of our common refrains is, "Are you a State Street player or are you a Main Street player?" And right now, what JJ McCarthy has been is he's been a somewhat dominant State Street player and a good average Main Street player. And so now you need him to flip the switch. Now he's a five-star quarterback. Um, all the talent is there. It's not like he's an inexperienced quarterback. He's now started, 10 games this season. He didn't start the first one. He started the last 10. He has thrown the ball 200 and something times. So it's not like he's a complete novice here. But he's going to have to flip a switch and be as good as he's ever been, and better than he's ever been. Where Michigan does have some ability is they do know how to use the tight ends really well. I mean, obviously, the Buckeyes, use their tight end pretty strongly too. But Michigan has really done a good job scheming their tight ends open. They've got a young guy named Colston Loveland that had a big game against Illinois that they're looking for. And then they're pretty good at crossing routes. They're literally they went and watched the 2018 Michigan Ohio State game when the Buckeyes crossed Michigan to death. And they finally implemented some of that in their game plan, and they're pretty good at crossing routes, but we haven't seen a lot of them recently. Is that because they don't want to put it on film for Ohio State, or as one of my sources from inside the program said, sometimes these coaches just forget the playbook, and I think that's what's happened a little bit. So yeah, I mean, if it comes down, you say like, well, you're not going to Blake Corum, Donovan Edwards is banged up, and the running game goes for less than 100 yards. Does Michigan win this game? I don't think you can find even the most confident Michigan fan that would say yes. But it's the game, and things happen in the game, and it's a moment where I'm sure inside Ohio State's locker room, the same thing's being said to them that is being said to Michigan. You came to Michigan for a moment like this. You didn't come to drop passes. You didn't come to miss blocks. You didn't come to fumble the football. You didn't come to miss a tackle. You came to Michigan to make the biggest plays on the biggest stage, and this is what you have. And a lot of times, boom, we just see it. We've seen it in this rivalry so many times where a player, an unexpected player or a great player, someone just comes out and balls out, and that's what Michigan's going to need from JJ McCarthy on Saturday.
Looking at the other side of the ball, defense, a lot of people are trying to say that this defense may be better than last year's. I have a hard time believing that with no Aiden Hutchinson,
Mhm.
no David Ojabo, no Daxton Hill. I mean, the numbers look really good. Of course, people may sit there and say, well, Michigan didn't play anybody
Mhm.
non-conference, and the Big Ten might have two and a half competent teams. So
Yeah.
there's a lot to be said there. But what is your view on where this Michigan defense is compared to maybe years past? I mean, especially when you don't necessarily have the rush ins that you did last
Mhm.
year, and Michael Morris has been hurt, but you have Mozzie Smith on the interior line has played really well. I mean, how does this defense kind of shape up?
Yeah, I mean, I think their numbers are inflated. I mean, they really are. I mean, look, the teams that Michigan played in the West were Iowa, which I mean everybody knows is one of the most anemic offenses in college football, especially when Michigan played them. They also played Illinois, that is that's a one-dimensional. They have Chase Brown, who's a great running back, but that's all that they have. And I'm trying to think who their third team that they played out of the way. Well, they played Nebraska, which is I mean, God, does that program suck? It's not like they played any challengers there. And then Ohio State fans know the programs in the East. I mean, yeah, Penn State, has a what is a backyard playground type of quarterback in Sean Clifford and some decent runners. But the rest, I mean, Maryland, which Ohio State just saw, I mean, Tagovailoa is a pretty good quarterback. They have some, Jared, a couple of wide receiver options, but there's no complete offense that Michigan played this year. There's just not. So I think their numbers are inflated. What I will say is they're stronger up the middle. Their defensive tackles are better than they were a year ago. Mozzie Smith has been everything that people have hoped he would be. And then Chris Jenkins next to him. I think he's third on the team in tackles. That doesn't happen for a defensive tackle very often, but he's just making a lot of plays. Their linebackers are better than they were a year ago. And then I think their cornerbacks are stronger than they were a year ago. DJ Turner is having a great season, and Jamon Green, a Texas kid who was part of the whole Michigan State, tunnel incident. He's been having his best year as a senior, so they feel pretty good about there. They like their safeties. Rod Moore's an Ohio kid, and was a pretty important player a year ago, and has stepped into a safety role, starting role. So they like those guys. Are they as capable at the edge position? No. I mean, Mike Morris has had a really nice season. He missed last week with an injury. He's Honestly, he's trending in a way where if he came back for another year, he'd probably be the best pass rusher in college football. He'd probably take the mantle from Will Anderson, in my opinion. I don't think he'll be back for a fifth year. I think he'll go pro. There's a lot of talk that he's a fringe first rounder and could play his way into the first round. They don't have the opposite guy. They don't have the David Ajabo to Aiden Hutchinson, right? They just don't have that player who's a bookend. They've tried a lot of different guys there. They use Jalen Harrell, who's better against the run than he is against the pass. Iabi Yoki, transfer from Alabama, had a couple of sacks, early on in Big Ten season and has really disappeared since then. Braden McGregor is a young kid, inconsistent. So yeah, I mean, if I'm Ohio State, I'm looking and going like, well, one of the issues last year, in addition to the fact that Michigan ran right over the top of Ohio State, was that CJ Stroud was not comfortable in that game. And Michigan, he threw for 300 yards, but it was a lot of passes to get to 300 yards. And Michigan made him, put him on the run a lot. Will they do that this year? I think Mike Morris has that ability. And I do think that the Michigan defensive coordinator, Jesse Minter, is going to bring a lot of pressure packages to try to confuse, to try to, get CJ Stroud to be off his game. But I mean, it's been hit or miss with whether that's been successful this year. So yeah, a lot of question marks about Michigan. I think both of these teams, Kevin, and I think, you looking at it from the Ohio State side, I think both these teams are flawed, right? I mean, they're 11-0, they're ranked number 2 and 3 in the country. And you'd go into that going like, wow, these are kick-ass, awesome teams. And I think both fan bases and both sides of the media are sitting and going like, yeah, they got a lot of flaws, man. They got a lot of flaws. Um, so will we see a, 42-39 like 2006 game where it's just blow to blow? I don't know. We might see a little bit more of like a slog between these two teams than we were expecting for 11-0 ball clubs.
One of the things that came out of last year's game was, there was a lot of popping off. Jim Harbaugh said, talking
Yeah.
about being born on third base and hitting a triple, and that was brought up this week, and then he re-clarified that it was kind of in reaction to an exchange about where Ryan Day allegedly said hang 100 on you.
Hmm.
There were quotes around the Michigan team saying that Michigan was the much tougher team, that Ohio State's not tough, they've become this finesse team. One of those attributed to Josh Gaddis, who's no longer with the program, who's got his own problems now somewhere else. But do you think, as you watch Michigan and kind of see Ohio State in terms of crossover or whatever, do you think this Ohio State team is tougher than the one it was last year? Because, the weather turned bad up at Michigan
Yeah.
Stadium, and, Ohio State couldn't run, and we're starting to see some of the same problems because Ohio State can't keep a running back healthy. But is this a tough Ohio State team?
I like their defensive front seven more than I like their offensive line. I'll say that. And which I think is actually the flip of what a lot of people have said, or that I've heard, is that, you look at like the Northwestern game a couple of weeks ago, and Northwestern did have success running the football, but I mean they also ran the ball 865 times in that game. So you're going to have some success. You can't always, I think when I look at it, there was a play in the Ohio State Maryland game last week. It was 4th and 1. I think Ohio State was up 33-30. Was that the score late in the fourth quarter where they're up by 3? It was a 4th and 1. And in that moment, what does every team in college football do? They run the football. And what did Ohio State do? They pass the football. And you might say, like, well, we're going to take them by surprise. They're expecting the run. I don't think so. I think that was Ohio State saying, in a moment like that where we have to have 1 yard to seal the game, we feel better about throwing the football than we do about running the football. To me, that is a physicality question mark. Now, should we read that much into it? I don't know, but Michigan fans are. I'll say this though. I said this on the radio in Ann Arbor. If you watch the Michigan Illinois game last week, JJ McCarthy, after every single snap and before every single snap, had his hands in like that hand warmer that they let the quarterbacks wear. Every single time, as soon as the play was over with, boom, hands in there. And he didn't pull them out until he literally had to catch the football. You watch Tommy DeVito for Illinois, he's got that hand warmer around him. Never saw him put his hands in it. Never saw him put his hands in it. I'm sure on the sideline when he's not in the game, his hands were in it, keep him warm. But like to me, that's like, well, Tommy DeVito looked like he was tougher than JJ McCarthy in that game. So I think this, Kevin, people are going to talk smack. There's going to be a little bit of smack talk before the game, but you know what? If Ohio State goes out there and wins on Saturday, then Ryan Day can get up there in the press conference and he can go right back at Jim Harbaugh and say, dude, what do you think you accomplished? You won one game in this rivalry, and now we just put you back in your place. Perfect. Have no problem with it. If Michigan wins, Jim Harbaugh can be like, hey man, um, maybe just got to first base this time. Like that bunt single. Like I mean, he can talk. He can talk. Whoever wins the game gets to talk, and I got no problem with that. Um, obviously, like a Buckeye fan's going to say, "Hey, Jim, you're 1-5 against Ohio State or whatever like that," but that doesn't matter, right? I mean, it's all about what it's all recency bias. You talk to a recruit who's 17 years old, and you say, "Hey, do you remember?" Um, prior to this year, USC. Oh, USC is a great program. And they're like, USC? Really? USC is a good like they have no idea. You know, all they care about is like what's happened in the last like 12 to 18 months. And that's all that really matters. And so whoever wins, I can't wait to hear the trash talk that comes out of the coach's mouth.
Yeah, it'll be must watch television there when it comes to the post games. Just a couple more quickly here. I mean, you talked about a lot of people around the Michigan program, fans, that is, maybe saying their prayers toward the health
Mm,
of Blake Corum, willing to offer up their legs to him to be able to make it through the game.
yeah.
But what's
Yeah.
what is the view? Because I went to a couple of places when I was up in Ann Arbor, and of course, I just talk to people. That's what I do, and I got a lot of people was like, well, gee, I'm really hopeful. I think we'll do well, but it was not a lot of definitive we're gonna kick them in the blank and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I don't spend a lot of time in Ann Arbor, so I don't know if their fans up there are as boisterous and as
Yeah.
demonstrative as the fans in Columbus. I mean, what is your read on people?
I think if Blake Corum was 100% healthy and didn't have the injury in the game against Illinois, I think you'd have this going on everywhere in Ann Arbor. I think the fans are smart enough to realize how critically important he is to the success of the team that they're like, if he doesn't play, I mean, they're not going to say we have no shot, but if he doesn't play, like, the confidence level goes from here to below the screen you can see. I mean, so I think that's where they're at. Is Michigan fans want to be excited this week? This is the best week of the year. It's Thanksgiving week. It's the week of the game. Like we should be every channel we turn on. And I haven't seen that. Maybe you have. And media has changed dramatically since 2006. But the week of the game in 2006, and now Bo died on that Friday. But leading up to it, I mean, you couldn't turn on ESPN, CBS, AB, like whatever site you went to. I mean, they had that countdown clock, right? From the Michigan Ohio State game. It was everywhere. Everyone was talking about it. The buzz was insane. This week, I think that it's tempered for Michigan fans because of the fact that Blake Corum is a big question mark, and they don't want to get their hopes up, and then go out there and, hey, Blake doesn't play, or Blake gets the first 5 snaps and then takes himself out of the game. So there's a lot of, I wouldn't even call it cautious optimism. I'd say it's a lot of wing and prayer, like just please, 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 please. Can he be good to go? And if he does play, Kevin, I'll say this: if he plays and he is able to go, I think the confidence level for Michigan fans goes back to like here, because then they do think that they can out tough Ohio State. Then they do think that they can shut down CJ Stroud. Then they do think that they have the better special teams and all those different things. Then they believe in Jim Harbaugh in a way that they haven't believed in Jim Harbaugh for the first 6 years of his career.
Well, that leads to our last question. How do you think this game plays out? And you want to offer up a prediction?
You know what? I have no problem doing that. I did it on Ann Arbor radio on Wednesday. I went with 31-24 Ohio State. And I wasn't trying to be a contrarian on purpose or anything like that. I just don't have great confidence that Blake Corum gives you more than 15 to 20 snaps. And out of those 15 to 20 snaps, a lot of those are as decoys. If JJ McCarthy at this point had been building and building and building and was a guy going out there and throwing for 300 yards against Illinois and they were completing deep balls down the field, I'd say, hey, maybe it doesn't matter if you don't have Corum. But he hasn't been that guy. Um, and defensively, I look at it and say, if the Buckeyes have got to be ready. Like that's a thing too for the Ohio State's front seven. Like they've got to be ready, right? Like Michigan's not going to take it by surprise by running the ball if Corum plays like 40 times, right? If Corum plays, like Ohio State has spent 12 months waiting for this game. They're not going to all of a sudden get run over again. I don't think that they will, but I mean, they've got to be ready for it. So I just think that tilts Ohio State's favor. They've got some injuries obviously to their running backs, and they've got some things they're working through. But Stroud is there and Harrison is there, and I haven't heard anything about Njigba being back. I don't think. I mean, it doesn't sound like he's going to play. But their wide receiver core, their tight end, are some of the best in the country. I think they'll be able to put up enough points on Michigan with their explosive offense, and then I think their defense will be able to um, again, I think their defense, whether Michigan has quorum or not, will be able to withstand, whatever Michigan's offense throws at them. Michigan's offense has had too many red zone trips where they come away with 3 points. And I don't see that really changing. It's one thing when you say like, hey, it's happened in 2 or 3 games. It's another thing that's happened in 11 games, right? 11 games is who you are. It's trending this way. It's who you are. And Michigan is a bad red zone offense. So I just don't think they'll score enough. Maybe it gets a little bit, maybe Ohio State, piles one on late and it's 38-24, but I'm taking the Buckeyes to win.
There you go. And you'll have to wait till Friday to get my pick. But spoiler alert, my score is remarkably close to Michael's on that one. So, I'll say this: it's between the two numbers that he put for Ohio State, and he's dead on with the number that he gave Michigan. So, I think I pretty much put it out there. But I'm looking forward to seeing it. I mean, Ohio State has spent 12 months preparing for Blake Corum and everything else, and people are like, well, I mean, what is a contingency plan if Blake Corum doesn't play? Well, I think you celebrate that you're not having to go against a guy that turns 2-yard runs into 5 and 5-yard runs into 10 and 10-yard runs into
30.
much
Yeah.
more. I mean,
Yeah.
so I don't think that there's any problem with preparing for these guys, but it's great that this rivalry, I mean, is back to the point that it is. You're exactly right that in 06 it was all over the place. I mean, even the 2-3 game, the it was this short game or whatever had a lot of buzz in that one. And this one, I don't know. I just haven't heard as much. I think that part of it is, the college football playoff landscape is just
Yeah.
really taken so much out of, out of single games. I just don't mean as much because of what it is you're going towards now.
Yeah, Kevin, Tuesday was the college football, top 4 reveal, and I watched it, and all they talked about when they talked about the game was there was like, well, whoever loses the game, could they still get in the playoff? They didn't even talk about the matchup. Now I'm sure college football game day is going to be in Columbus. I know that, and there'll be a lot more. And after we get past Thanksgiving, there'll be a lot more too. But I'll say this too: the Heisman Trophy is getting decided on Saturday, without a doubt in my mind. Whoever wins the game, I don't care if CJ Stroud throws two interceptions compared to 3 touchdowns and 250 yards, or if Blake Corum goes out there. Voters love a heroic performance, right? If Blake Corum goes out there and plays and rushes for 125 yards and Michigan wins, there ain't anything anybody else in the college football can do. He's going to win the Heisman. So that's being decided on Saturday. Whoever's team wins, that player is going to win the Heisman.
No, I agree. I agree. So, I mean, it's going to be Ohio State, Michigan in New York again. We haven't had our Heisman finalists announced, but C.J. Stroud and Aiden Hutchinson were there last year. C.J. Stroud will certainly be there again this year. Blake Corum, even if he isn't able to go, I think we'll probably garner enough votes to get the trip to New York and everything else. So it'll be a lot of fun with that. But Michael, thank you for joining us. I really appreciate it. It was great catching up, and thank you for sharing all of your knowledge with all my viewers.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to be here anytime. I love this game. I think maybe some people, maybe don't in Columbus, but I'm married to a Spartan. I am a Wolverine. So we have a lot of fun the Michigan State week, but nothing comes close to what it's like this week. I've had my Michigan flag out there since, well, I mean, I put it out Saturday morning last week for Illinois, and I have not taken it down since. So it's flying high, and I'm geeked for Saturday.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it as well. But I want to thank you for being part of the show. And I want to thank all my viewers as well for being part of the show. Until next week, hopefully we're talking about the Big Ten championship game, but we'll have to wait and see. I'll talk to you later.